Hello, I am Drew Gardner here with the two Mississippi Museums. I want to welcome everyone this week to this week's History is Lunch program. We're in our home in the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium here in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. We're also streaming live on Facebook and YouTube where those videos are available anytime afterwards to watch. We will hope that you guys will join us. This is a little ways out, but we have a registration only for this event. But we hope you guys will join us for our Historic Objects Collection Tour. It's Thursday, February 20th. However, space is limited. And so we'd love for you to join us. And so if you'll secure a spot by registering online at MDAH's events page, you'll be able to secure that spot. And then we hope you'll join us again next week for History is Lunch when Jim Wiggins joins us, where he'll present his latest book, Outliving the White Lie, a Southerner's historical, genealogical, and personal journey. Today we have the pleasure of a special guest introducing Dr. McHaney here in just a moment. If you will give a round of applause, we'll welcome Suzanne Mars to the stage. There you go.
I hope I can do two things at once, hold the mic and read my introduction. Pearl McHaney really needs no introduction. Her accomplishments are well known, and we've been fortunate to hear her many times here at MDAH, at Lemuria, and at Millsaps College. If only we could convince her and her husband Tom, himself a distinguished Faulkner scholar, to move to Jackson, we'd be perfectly happy. And now, having said that Pearl needs no introduction, I'm going to give one anyway. Pearl is Kenneth M. England Professor Emerita at Georgia State University, a recipient of the Eudora Welty Society's Phoenix Award for Distinguished Achievement in Welty Scholarship. She is also editor emerita of the Eudora Welty Review, a journal she created building upon the much more humble Eudora Welty newsletter. The Eudora Welty Review is now in its 25th year. But let me take you back even further in time. 31 years ago in April, Pearl McHaney escorted Eudora Welty to a publication party for Welty's most recent book, A Writer's Eye, Contemporary Book Reviews. You can buy a copy right over there. The place for this party was Lemuria Bookstore. The editor of the book was Pearl herself, and the volume's publication marked the beginning of a beautiful friendship between Pearl and Welty scholars everywhere. Pearl would subsequently edit the Contemporary Reviews, a collection of periodical assessments of Welty's own fiction, and a book called Occasions, in which she brought together hard-to-find Welty essays, stories, journalism, speeches, and tributes. I depend on these books, and I use them all the time. Let me add that Occasion includes one of my favorite poems by Eudora Welty, written with friends at the moment of a notable event in Mississippi history, the moment when Governor Paul B. Johnson caned Fred Sullins in the lobby of the Walthall Hotel. And that poem contains these memorable lines, might say immortal lines. They met by a pillar, they met by a post. It was hard to tell who was whacked the most. But as Pearl knows, I digress. I'm given to digressions. There is more to tell about Professor McHaney. Her book, A Tyrannous Eye, Eudora Welty's Nonfiction and Photography, is the first full-length study of Welty's artistry in these genres and has been universally recognized as a major addition to Welty scholarship. In addition, Pearl has written, by one count, more than 30 essays and book chapters, and has given even more conference presentations and lectures, both nationally and internationally. Her essay about the actual Venetian mirror that inspired a fictional one in The Burning is a particular favorite of mine. Her focus in such essays has, fortunately for us, been on Welty, but she has also written or lectured about William Faulkner, Barry Hannah, Tennessee Williams, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Tony Grooms, Sindidwe, I hope I pronounce it, Sindidwe Magona, David Mamet, Alice Munro, Flannery O'Connor, and Natasha Trethewey. Let me close by thanking Pearl for all the time she has answered my phone calls and emails requesting information about Welty. I count on her. Some of those communications we've had long distance have concerned Welty's work on the Lamar Life radio news. Now we can all look forward to learning more on that topic. Please welcome Pearl McHaney.
Wow. Thank you, dear. Hugs are not so good for this earpiece. I want to thank Chrissy Wilson, who started the History as Is Lunch programs way back. And I want to thank Patty Carr Black, who is not here today, but without her, I would not have the treasured photocopies of the Lamar Life radio news and many other insights that she gave us. And I also, of course, want to thank Suzanne for that amazing, mythical, imaginative introduction. Hard to believe. So here we are. The stories of the Lamar Life Insurance Company, Christian Welty, the Lamar Life radio station WJDX, and the weekly Lamar Life radio news edited by Eudora Welty are inseparable. In her memoir, Welty wrote that the Weltys were a Lamar Life family. At the head of that family was her father, a man who believed in progress and technology. He invested in the human spirit and in communal efforts. Nearly from its inception, Lamar Life Insurance and Christian Welty were synonymous. As the company grew and Mr. Welty rose in its administration, he oversaw not only the construction of the Lamar Life building, but also the inauguration of WJDX as an NBC-affiliated radio station. Just as he died, the Lamar Life Radio News was launched with Eudora Welty as its editor. For more than a year, primarily in 1931 and 1932, Eudora wrote both an editor's mic column and stories that accompanied the weekly program schedule. In April of 1906, just 2 years after Christian Webb Welty and Chestina Andrews married, Christian joined the Lamar Life Insurance Company at its home office. Eudora Welty described the office as a little one-story, four-columned Greek temple next door to the Pythian Castle, a building with crenellations and a high roof that looked as though Douglas Fairbanks might come swinging out on the top from a rope. The name Lamar Mutual Life is engraved on the frieze. Here, as a child, visiting her father's office, the future writer tapped out letters to her mother on the office typewriter and put on earphones to hear the recorded voice of her father's secretary on the dictaphone. There was no life insurance company in Mississippi at the time, primarily because, as a southern state, such an enterprise was considered a bad risk. Yet, 60 prominent businessmen made a show of regional economic patriotism and chartered Lamar Life with capital funds of $50,000. By December, Christian Welty had advanced to assistant secretary, and 3 years later, the year Eudora was born, Christian was promoted to secretary. In 1918, when his daughter was 9 years old, Christian was promoted to vice president and agency manager, and in another 3 years to vice president and general manager. And in January 1931, he became president of Lamar Life. Established as the capital of Mississippi in 1822, now I'm really a Yankee, but I've lived in Georgia and traveled here in Mississippi, so this history is well known to you, here especially at the museums. But in 1882, Jackson was the legislative center where businesses, banks, and insurance companies flourished. Jackson soon became a railroad hub, distinguishing it from the river towns of Vicksburg and Natchez. Lamar Life weathered the 1907-1910 Depression. It extended its services into Tennessee, maintained financial security through World War I and the influenza epidemic, and began to flourish with the rest of the country during the Roaring Twenties, expanding into Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. In Jackson, with a population of 22,000 in 1920, Lamar Life prospered and maintained integrity of an ethical and empathic business. Services, such as those in response to the 1927 Mississippi flood, showed that a local company could render that which transcends the normal business dealings and enables a growing financial institution to provide for its reason for existence. During the economic crises of the Great Depression, the company made loans on policies. It delayed premiums and loan payments as needed, and paid benefits without delay, not like today. In 1932, Lamar Life reported that the death claims since its founding had paid $5.24 on every $1 purchased. That same year, the company boasted policyholders in 42 of the 48 states, plus a global reach with a commercial attaché in Europe, an army officer in the Orient, an aviator in Central America, an oil man in the Dutch West Indies, and a transportation official in Canada. Mississippi Governor Martin Connor claimed that Lamar Life was one of Mississippi's greatest institutions, adding that the people of this state have unlimited confidence in its management. In 1956, 25 years after her father's death, Welty commented on the importance of the home office and on her father's character. On its 50th birthday, I am very grateful for all that the Lamar Life has given me. It's not only the very real help I've had from the company that I'm grateful for, indispensable though that's been. It isn't the warm memories, just as substantial and for which I'd not take anything. It's not simply the enduring sight of a building that makes the old pride and exhilaration my father felt and conveyed to me start up in my heart. It is partly a sort of kinship, a blood tie, the thing that is thicker than water. Most of all, though, perhaps it's the passionate and guiding belief my father instilled in me of the meaning of the home company, the integrity of a thing that springs from and lives on in its own nourishing soil. And regardless of how we may grow and come to link up with the larger world, a natural process of development, it is the principle of that first goodness, that original integrity, that must be the root of all excellence that can follow, and will always responsibly account for it and bless it. Early on, when the company outgrew its rented spaces, it fell to Christian Welty to oversee the 1923-1925 construction of the 10-story Lamar Life building, Jackson's first skyscraper, at a cost of $700,000. At the opening reception, Mr. Welty reported, "Not a dollar was borrowed, nor a security sold for the erection of this new building. And it is all paid for. The building will stand, now and always, free from debt, as the most valuable assets of its policyholders." Lamar Life's 10-story concrete frame structure, sheathed in a rather elaborate Gothic terracotta shell, similar to that used on the landmark New York skyscraper, the Woolworth Building, lending this building its nickname, the Woolworth Building of the South. The clock tower tops the building at 191 feet. It was dubbed the Singing Tower, as it was the home of the WJDX radio studios. Welty records that her father was pleased with the design of the Lamar Life building, with the gargoyles above and the alligator stone decorations of the main entrance below. I think you can still go down and see those. "At every stage of the building," she wrote, "Daddy took his family to see as much as we could climb over, and at last we could climb by the fire escape to reach the top. We stood on the roof. with a not yet working clock towering at our backs, and viewed all Jackson below, spread to its seeable limits, its green rim, where the still river-like Pearl River and the still unpaved over Town Creek meandered and joined together in their unmolested swamp with the country beyond. We were located where we stood there, part of our own map. By February 1929, the company boasted more than 300 agents. For the celebration of Christian Welty's 50th birthday, February 15, 1929, the Clarion Ledger reported that Lamar Life's field agents had, quote, produced in his honor on that day 10 times the normal business, and among the flowers were 50 carnations from the girls of the Home Office. One might expect that the stock market crash of October 29 would have brought future celebrations to an end, but Welty and Lamar Life were on such a trajectory of progress that they seemed not even to slow down. With the Lamar Life's new building and expanded territories, Christian Welty understood that radio nationwide was providing advertising and promoting business. Company management then reasoned that radio might be a business stimulant to the area in which policyholders lived and conducted their various activities. And so it was decided to create a company-owned radio station. As the only station in Mississippi at the time with a national partnership, WJDX broadcast national, world, and state news, civic speeches, government and educational programs, as well as local club activities and talent. On November 24, 1929, the New York Times announced that WJDX Jackson was added to the National Broadcasting Company as a permanent outlet for a national network with a wavelength of 236.1 meters and a frequency of 1,270 kilocycles. I hope that makes important sense to some of you. To illustrate this terrific trajectory of this new media, I keep thinking about AI as a comparable 21st century phenomenon. So in 1922, January, there were only 30 U.S. radio stations that were broadcasting. 14 months later, there were 556 operating. When WJDX went live in 1929, the several radio stations operating in Mississippi, in Columbus and Gulfport, Utica, Hattiesburg, Greenville, had only limited local range, primarily for announcing daily cotton prices and weather reports. So WJDX's national affiliation was of utmost importance, and it offered much more. Planned for Saturday, November 30, 1929, the station's launch was celebrated in two sections of the next day's Clarion Ledger, Sunday, December 1. Let me see, let's go back. No, okay, we'll go here. All of Jackson rallied around the station by advertising goods and services, radio sets, power companies, furniture stores, and movie theaters. Companies that specialized in heating and roofing and wiring and sheet metal work responsible for the radio station towers advertised. The Lamar Life radio broadcasting station, tagged the Pride of the South, highlighted its significance for Jackson, announcing that WJDX would present programs of best Mississippi talent and National Broadcasting Company. N.W. Overstreet, who might be a familiar name for some of you, was the associate architect of the Lamar Life building, and he designed the radio transmission station building at 5826 North State Street that was then but a small rock road all the way to Memphis. As with other radio transmission stations, WJDX resembled a radio. Its form and detailing were apparently meant to represent an upright Philco radio of the time. The small, long, narrow windows in the building made to resemble the radio's speaker grill. An Egyptian mural of an explorer discovering the tomb of one of the great pharaohs is carved over its doors. The motif was popular in Art Deco at the time because at this time the explorers were actually unearthing the Egyptian pharaohs. The transmission station was deemed a little architectural gem with modern and complete technical equipment downstairs, and luxurious living quarters for the staff engineers, operators upstairs. It doesn't look that big though, does it? Despite its Art Deco design and modern technology, the transmitter was out in the country among agricultural fields. Ben Root, the oldest son of Percy Root, the transmitter engineer, recalled, "People would drive out to the station from Jackson and see all the wires and tubes and machinery, and it had a sort of Hollywood quality to it. Farm workers who were working in the nearby cotton fields would always come by on the nights when Joe Louis was fighting. 20 or 30 of them would gather around the front door to hear the fight. I always thought it amazing that my father was connecting the cotton fields to Madison Square Gardens." The programs arriving by telephone wire were sent to the transmitting station's twin towers, 200 feet tall and 500 feet apart. FCC regulations required that there be an engineer at the transmitting station for 24 hours. So Percy Gordon Root Sr. operated and maintained the transmitter room downstairs, where there was also a workroom, a reception room, and an office, while he, his wife, and his 10 children lived upstairs at the station. That's why I said it didn't look that big. As a young shortwave radio hobbyist, Root had heard Titanic's Morse code distress signal. He was a lifelong electronic engineer and radio guru, and according to fellow engineers in his family, he helped build WJDX from the ground up and was responsible for getting it on the air. Equipment and materials for the transmitter were hauled to the site by mule-pulled carts, and Mississippi Power and Light had to specially wire the electricity for the transmitter. Ben Root, the son, explained that the radio station would have to go off the air during storms or power outages. Even after the natural gas generator was put in, it took about 5 or 10 minutes to crank it up and get the station back on the air. The intended November 30 inaugural broadcast did not, in fact, happen. Not because of Wall Street's collapse, but due to the transmission equipment difficulties. Nonetheless, visitors were invited to the studios that very Sunday from 9 to noon and 2 to 5, whereas thereafter, the regular hours for visitations were strictly limited from 3 to 4 o'clock. Readers were directed to sections 2 and 3 of the Clarion Ledger. 12 full pages devoted to news stories, pictures, and advertising featuring the radio station, plus interesting details and information concerning the equipment, policy, and program of Mississippi's newest, biggest, and best broadcasting station. Front and center were of the front page of this special section were portraits of Lamar Life President H.S. Weston and Vice President and General Manager C.W. Welty, reminding readers of both the economics and the leaders involved in bringing the world to Jackson via radio waves. Stories of new technologies and electrical research for improved reception filled the pages, especially advertisements in the guise of news. Headlines throughout demonstrated the commitment and the hope of Jackson's capitalists in supporting the national radio broadcast station. All were ready for the first broadcast, lamentably postponed. WJDX finally went on the air on Wednesday, December 4, 1929, from 9:30 p.m. to 12:02 a.m. The broadcast tested the clarity, tone, and volume of the reception, judged by telephone and telegram messages to the station. Listeners from Vicksburg, New Orleans, Atlanta, Louisville, Houston, Buffalo, Rochester, Gainesville, Florida, and from cities in Minnesota, Maryland, and New Jersey reported clear signals and excellent reception. The same formal and elaborate program planned for the opening was announced for the coming Saturday evening, and the morning paper published a full program of 30 segments beginning at 8:30 p.m. An abundance of local talented debuted, consisting of piano, violin, accordion, tenor, baritone, mezzo-soprano, and mezzo-contralto solos, And there were duets and trios and quartets of popular songs and announcements, introductions, and greetings from Lamar Life leaders, WJDX director and announcer, the Jackson Airport manager, the city mayor, and Governor Bilbo. Within days, WJDX programming was announced in the Clarion Ledger, and by Wednesday, December 11, 1929, the station was on the air from noon until 10 p.m. with programs such as National Farm and Home Hour, Radio Dealers and Distributors Demonstration Hour, and a music program from the Piney Woods School. The Friday newspaper announced that WJDX would give play-by-play details of the Kosciuszko-Ellisville State High School Football Championship. It was the first local competition to broadcast. The previous week, Georgia Tech game was heard. The radio dealers continued to both educate about and sell this modern technology, and the station boasted of having received and relayed a speech by William Marconi, father of radio and from far off England. Explanations continued to be necessary. Every radio station has its dead spots, and some of them inexplicably dead, while others are obviously killed by interference or obstructions of various and sundry nature. And the good reception in Crystal Springs in the daytime, but not at night? Oh, just one of those inexplicable things about radio, explained the general manager. The Clarion Ledger also tried to quiet complaints. Radio, the comparatively new plaything of science, a plaything in a sense, and yet one that is being taken more seriously in a commercial way than anything of late since the automobile, still presents many mysteries. Its very basic principles of traveling on aerial waves remain somewhat hazy to the layman and hard for him to grasp. I have to think about the cloud. Where is it? Publications announcing program schedules varied greatly. Only occasionally did the Morning Clarion Ledger provide announcement for the programs, although these were typically fillers and included in society news or in arts news. WJDX clearly made an impact on the lives of its listeners who heard their local activities advertised alongside national programs and news. By mid-1932, the national radio audience numbered 68.5 million, bringing the modern world, news, politics, entertainment, and education from East, Midwest, and West Coast cities to Jackson. In October 1930, after 9 successful months of broadcasting, Wiley P. Harris, friend of Christian Welty, was appointed the new broadcasting director. Perhaps taking seriously the station break, WJDX, the voice of Mississippi, Harris announced a new feature of 5-minute talks about the state's business each weekday. The initial programming illustrates the station's efforts to address the depressed economy. There were reports from the State Bureau of Markets, the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Secretary of State, the Forestry Department, and the State Board of Health. Coincidentally or not, just below Harris's announcement are a few paragraphs headlined Lamar Life Executives Attending Convention, and a note that C.W. Welty, Vice President and General Manager of Lamar, was made the State Vice President from Mississippi for the American Life Convention. Along with the development of the radio station, Christian Welty's progressive ideas for Lamar Life included all-stars trips for his top-selling agents and their families to attend the annual conventions of the Association of National Life Insurance Underwriters. Again, the comparison to today's insurance is just mind-boggling. The first, a July 1924 trip, took 26 Lamar Life underwriters, 3 of whom were women, from Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, plus Vice President and General Manager Christian Welty, the company secretary, and 17 family guests, including 15-year-old Eudora. By specially commissioned train, they traveled to the convention in Los Angeles and back, with stops in New Orleans, Houston, Mexico, Santa Fe, the Grand Canyon, San Francisco, the Great Salt Lake, Colorado Springs, and Pikes Peak. The trip was commemorated in a booklet, To the Golden Gate and Back Again, being observations by the man in the lower 10. It contained reminiscences by the travelers who shared the highlights and expressed gratitude to Mr. Welty for all the pleasures and benefits of the trip. The underwriters commented at length about the importance of the trip. What could be more helpful to the field men than to meet one another and tell of their experiences and exchange ideas? And I can now more readily appreciate why the Lamar life is growing at such a rapid rate, and I cannot but feel that the get-together spirit developed will prove of great value both to the company and to the individual members of the agency organization. In September 1929, as the All-Stars agents cruised the Great Lakes, Vice President and General Manager Welty announced $1.5 million in new business to celebrate the birthday of H.S. Weston, Lamar Life's third president. Welty was named the fourth president for Lamar Life on January 26, 1931. Eudora wrote home from New York, "Dearest Daddy, I am so glad and proud you are president now. You certainly deserve it, and you'll be the best president there is of anything. But don't you think you need a rest? Why don't you and Mother go to Cuba for 10 days or so? It would be marvelous, and you deserve a rest as much as the presidency." The company's 25th anniversary trip that August was, in fact, to Havana, and Christian and his sons Edward and Walter accompanied him. Following that trip, Christian Welty, later diagnosed with leukemia, was advised to rest. Then, H.S. Weston, the third president of Lamar Life, died on September 7, 1931. Weston was lauded as a vigorous maker of Mississippi, a pioneer lumberman, a life insurance builder, and a philanthropist who gave without ostentation. Christian Welty had been absent from the company for several weeks when, on September 17, 10 days after Weston's passing, he suffered a paralytic stroke. He died on September 23, and his death was reported in the next day's papers. A character sketch ran on page 4 of the Clarion Ledger on September 25. Christian Welty, buried in Jackson yesterday, lived one of those remarkable lives the world sees only on rare occasion. A man whose climb in the world of business and finance was truly magnificent. Mr. Welty retained all the human and companionable qualities that endeared him so deeply to family and friends. Mr. Welty came to Jackson as a man who started from scratch and stepped out in front of his competitors in highly spirited fashion. He ran the race in a constant sprint, achieving thereby heights few of his fellows ever scale. This sudden blow of death finished a career as truly inspirational as any Jackson has seen at first hand. Mr. Welty leaves behind a record of sterling deeds and studious effort worth countless fortunes to the youth of the city who will take his example to heart. The flag on the Lamar Life building was flown at half-mast, and in a show of enormous respect, the WJDX microphones were mute. Christian Welty was 52 years old. Eudora was 22, had finished a year of study at Columbia Graduate School of Business, and was hoping for a job in New York City. Her brother Edward was a student at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and her brother Walter was still at Jackson High School. Anticipating a second year at Columbia, Eudora Welty had rented an apartment in New York City for the summer of 1931. But after her father's trip to Cuba and his prescribed rest, she went home in mid-August. She soon busied herself editing the Lamar Life radio news. Welty explained, "Since Mr. Fred Sullins refused to carry the schedule of the radio broadcasts in his paper, the conservative Jackson Daily News, and a rival to the Clarion Ledger, we got out a little weekly paper. We sent it out to anyone who wanted it, with the schedule, that the programs were coming, the timing, and a little leaflet kind of thing, 4 pages long. And I was the editor of it. I had to make up whatever was in it. It was fun because I could write things about people who appeared on the programs. It was exciting because everything was new." Welty is listed as editor of all the extant copies of radio news. 25 years later, she recalled for Patty Black her work at WJDX. My father's death, when he was only 52, coincided with the Depression. It was at this time in my own life that the Lamar life came to my rescue. Not only with funds from life insurance, it gave me a job. WJDX had been organized, one of the last projects of my father's day, and was humming along on the roof of the building, right next to the clock, in a little bird cage of a studio into which Mr. Wiley Harris could scarcely fold himself. Mr. Harris, out of the kindness of his heart, gave me my first paying job. I must say, it was the sort of job a young girl considers ideal. It was part-time, and it was vague. I edited, as one of my duties, a little newsletter, printing for our listeners the program schedule of the week, interviews, and so on. It was the nicest job I ever had. There are 48 extant issues of the weekly Lamar Life radio news from September 20, 1931 to October 2, 1932, plus one issue in February 1933. The history of radio in Mississippi summarizes Welty's job as handling writing chores and publicity. I consider this a demonstration of Welty's modesty, as well as how she felt about the insignificance of this ephemeral job home in Jackson. But as the editor of Radio News, Welty took her responsibilities seriously. She composed the weekly Editor's Mic column. She featured stories from NBC. She highlighted national news. She conducted interviews. She wrote a weekly call for applause letters of appreciation and support to help keep the popular programs available. In addition to providing the schedule of programming, she encouraged auditions for local programming. She wrote fillers for the odd inches. She announced contests and promotional offers. In Welty's story, Why I Live at the P.O., Sister says, I happen to know where I can send a box top and get a packet of 1,000 mixed seeds, no two the same, free. You hear things like that all the time if you know how to listen to the radio. Perfectly marvelous offers. Anything you want, free. In the second issue of Radio News, Welty explains in her Editor's Mic column how WJDX broadcasts worked while demonstrating her awareness of audience, her talent for descriptive language, and her business understanding, learned not only at Columbia, but also from her father's acumen. We are a transmitting station, not a receiving station like your own radio set at home. Programs come through us, and the way they come is by long-distance telephone wire, and the way we get them is by a business contract. The National Broadcasting Company operates a great system of telephone wires. Yes, it's been kept from us long enough. This is the network, just a big system of long-distance telephone wires. These travel to all the NBC stations, which, for convenience, are grouped together according to location. The WJDX's group are with other southern stations, those of Louisville, Atlanta, Memphis, New Orleans, Nashville, and Birmingham. One great wire travels down from the National Broadcasting Station, passing through each of these cities for the station there to hook up to and transmit the program being sent through on the wire. One senses that Welty is explaining this to herself, as well as to her radio audience, who had already been asking for their favorite programs and bemoaning when a show was canceled. For she concludes, one thing is evident right away. We can broadcast in our NBC programs only what NBC sends down to us. Welty's wit and creative energy and understanding of human nature, that point to her fiction with its exquisite and modernist techniques, fill the columns of the Radio News. In the Editor's Mic, clearly this is so, but it's also in the news items, the interviews, the descriptions of new programs, the promotions, and the biographical sketches. In the second issue here of the Radio News, produced while her father was resting at home before his stroke, Welty interviewed the Leake County Revelers, a popular string band. Welty writes, the Leake County Revelers on their weekly Saturday night hop into Jackson were interviewed, and the interview goes hot to the press of our own WJDX newspaper. Making way past the mob of men that hung over each other's shoulders to watch the Leake County Revelers playing old hat on the other side of the glass door to the studio, the interviewer finally reached the inner sanctum just as the boys were signing off. How long have you revelers been reveling? They were asked. Have you any favorites? Oh, but the audience has favorites, the interview suggested. They come in crowds to the studio to watch the broadcast, taking turns at the glass door. They nearly always say, "What? Is that the Lee County Revelers? No beards? No red suspenders? I thought the Lee County Revelers were old. I thought they were farmers. I thought..." And they stop in wonder. No, the boys are young, and they always have on ties. And when people stare hard at them through the door, they have always resisted the temptation to make faces. This is a hard task, as anyone who broadcasts will tell you, and just shows that the Lee County Revelers know their microphony business. In her first feature, Welty is showing off. She's both present as the interviewer and absent, for there's no byline, and she refers to herself only in third person. She creates the dialogue in the voices of the fans and shows their lack of sophistication with their use of country stereotypes. And then she speaks of her insider knowledge, as anyone who broadcasts knows. She provides details to the readers to picture the studio, uses visual gags, the boys' temptation to make faces, and enjoys her clever wordplay of the microphony business. She had spent a year studying Marketing 1, Marketing 2, Marketing 3, as she told Hunter Cole. And what she learned there shows. The string band is named 15 times, and she puts the final cell in the closing paragraph of the interview. One thing not generally known about the Lee County Revelers is that they do other things besides broadcasting and recording. They give musical programs in local theaters in Mississippi and in consolidated schools and at fairs, and can put on as good a rube as you will see anywhere. In her editor's mic columns and news features, Welty demonstrates her keen sense of audience. She instructs the listeners on the sorts of applause letters to send. Radio program, quote, "want to please all the people all the time. It's like trying to work crossword puzzles with your left hand, read a preface to morals or another good book in your right hand, dance beautifully with both feet, and balance a stack of money on your head." This is Welty's vintage wit, providing a graphic image, although she continues in a serious tone. Complaining letters, denouncing Amos and Andy, when those 50 million others love it, don't weigh as much in the letters scale. Constructive letters amass themselves into a potent force. Great things result from such letters, too. Metropolitan broadcasts will be heard next year, for example. In other spots, Welty helps the radio listeners see the Winter Olympics, the football games, the circus acts, and she reports with figurative language, lists, and visual details. She explains how the Rose Bowl broadcast will include a parabolic mic in the stadium to catch all the color of the cheering and singing, giving the nationwide radio audience a full picture of the game and attendant ceremonies. The parade floats will be decorated with grasses, ferns, smilax, vines, palms, roses, lilies, chrysanthemums, and poinsettias. In another issue, she promises the radio will bring word pictures of the Derby Day crowd and horses, and a sudden sound in your ear will make you see a cloud of Epsom dust rise before your eyes. The primary purpose of the radio news, of course, was to provide the full schedule of programming. Yet Welty's interviews and feature stories and selection and recasting of NBC News items serve to illustrate Welty's astute understanding of the radio audience as she whetted their appetites for radio listening. The radio news of May 15, 1932 included 3 WJDX photos, one of Wiley Harris and Welty and the superintendent of the Lamar Life posing before the Gothic clock tower. Another of the WJDX antenna tower. Sorry, I'll go back there. And thirdly, the Art Deco transmitter building. Welty perhaps was contrasting, Welty indeed was contrasting the new Radio City building reported in the same issue, that building was to have more floor area than any other office building in the world. 27 studios and 6 audition rooms. All of the studios were to be 2 stories high, with the exception of one planned to be the largest in the world at more than 3 stories. All readily adaptable to television, and most with balconies equipped with theater seats for guests. The front page of the next radio news is filled with a photo captioned, "A happy scene in WJDX's studio." A little bit of a contrast. Mr. Harris, the director, is seated with Mrs. Foster, the hostess, and Mr. Howell, the announcer, is approaching the microphone. There's another little microphone on the desk, so Mr. Harris can put in a word now and then, and you can see the chimes there too, looking like the end off the xylophone. That shawl with the fringe on the left is draped over the Baldwin, where Miss Lois McCormick is getting ready to broadcast, and she'll be in the next sitting, so watch for her. The canary looking so sweet in this picture. I don't know if you can imagine, okay? The canary looking so sweet in this picture has gone to live in a better land for canaries. All this, of course, is a very homey and happy contrast to the New York studios. As Christian Welty and Lamar Life had anticipated, WJDX was a boon to the local economy, education, and culture. The 6th District of Mississippi Federation of Women's Clubs presented Mrs. Marie Hull, the acknowledged star of the local art scene, speaking on Mississippi in art. Popular Millsaps professor J. Reese Lynn demonstrated the preeminent place Mississippi holds in the realm of fine arts. Jackson's Little Theater Players presented a 13-week series of radio plays. During the summer lull in national programs, Welty wrote, "We aren't looking for genius, we're looking for talent." In one of her editorial columns, Welty stresses the importance of radio. "We have heard symphony orchestras that we could never have traveled to hear. We have been present vicariously at national political conventions and heard the major addresses directly and fully. And we have had presented to us leaders in every religious view, so that our intolerance has lessened with understanding. Current events are being broadcast hot and significant off the national, international griddle. What will be the national result of all this generally distributed culture and information, this broadening?" Decades later, in her essay, Place in Fiction, Welty answers her question by promoting the arts to bring about understanding among nations and individuals. In her Highlights of the Week section, Welty calls attention to 1 or 2 programs per day. And in these features, Welty had free rein over her selections, as she must have had over 1-page features that she balanced between local stories and those provided by the national network. Occasionally, she allowed herself to editorialize. In Federation of Women's Clubs on radio here, she states, "This sort of feature is almost entirely new in the radio world. In only 2 or 3 of the states has the privilege of the radio been extended to the women that they might broadcast some of the features and accomplishments of their federated clubs." She concludes, "We are glad to bring our radio audience in closer contact with this organized force of women who, by their work for home and community uplift, have become one of the more important institutions of our national life." Only one issue of the radio news has been discovered after the October 1932 number. 15 months after Christian Welty's death and the weekly job of editing the radio news, Welty escaped Jackson to New York City looking for work. She wrote several times to her friend Frank Lyle that she was still looking for a job. Financially, WJDX and Lamar Life Insurance may have been coping well enough during the Depression. But March 1933, when the commercial banking system collapsed, forcing President Roosevelt to declare a national bank holiday, was a particularly inauspicious time to be looking for work. Without the employment that she hoped for, Welty filled her time with concerts, plays, dance performances, art exhibits, and her radio news column. In that last extant issue, February 1933, published during her job search, Welty addresses the usual topics necessary for supporting WJDX. Have you ever estimated the cost of free entertainment you receive over your radio? Suppose you had to buy a ticket for an opera seat every Saturday afternoon, or a football game to one of the big university matches. During these times of financial struggles, it would be a decided extravagance to pay for tickets for all these entertainments that you receive free. Never in the history of inventions has any one thing afforded the public the pleasures and the education and the constant companion as your radio set. Elsewhere in this newsletter, still addressing both national economic situation and the benefits of WJDX, Welty notes the radio news is just $1 a year, and you get a copy every week. On December 7th, 1931, WJDX celebrated its second anniversary as the Lamar Life Insurance Company's national affiliated radio station, fulfilling one of Christian Welty's dreams. In her editor's mic, Welty cites a report from the NBC Supervisor of Audience Mail that for a 10-month period in 1930, before the radio news existed, 162 letters were received from WJDX. And for a similar length of time, including Welty's first 7 weeks as editor and her weekly calls for applause letters, there were 1,292 letters received. Welty notes here that the letters are coming in from Hawaii, Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And she concludes, "Bless your hearts, audience, you have done nicely." And she encourages more applause. Thank you. So, go to your local NPR radio station and send an applause letter and some money. I'm not being paid for that, but.
All right, we've got time for questions from the audience.
I'm hoping that you will all go home and look in your files in the attics and in the basement and in the closets, and you will find more of these Lamar Life radio news.
I might have misheard the date. For how long a period of time was Christian Welty the president of Lamar Life?
Actually, he was the president for a very short time. You were right to hear that. But he had been the general manager for a much longer period of time, and since Weston was also sick at that time, he was really in charge for a longer period of time. But you were right, just a short time. I had that picture earlier, sorry. Is there a question over here? No.
We do have a comment, and Laura, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're here, so you may or may not know this answer. But Mark Carlson from the Facebook live stream asked, the train booklet, travel booklet that you referenced, is that digitally available, or is it only available in person in the archive? Do you know?
No, it's only in the archives, and it's under the Lamar Life files.
Okay, so it's available under the Lamar Life files.
And that's what else you
interested.
should look for. At the end of that booklet, which I can look up for you later, I brought the file because I happen to have a little photocopy of it, that lists all of the underwriters who had attended. And I have spent hours looking in subject files and looking online at the archives for these other people, hoping that somebody else kept this copy. This original one copy that I saw first was at Ole Miss at the John Davis Williams Library when Thomas Verich was organizing and looking at things. That's how I found out about it. Suzanne, thank you.
I think Eudora told me one time.
Suzanne, I'm going to come with the mic so our live stream folks can hear you.
I think Eudora told me one time that she herself wrote some fan mail
Yes.
to the Lamar Life News.
That's always been the understanding, you know, that's how you get so many letters. And you can just imagine what she was writing in, you know. I tried to give some suggestions of the wit that she used. This talk will be published in a collection about Welty and media and technology that's supposed to come out maybe this summer. And in that piece, I talk a little bit more about the kind of relationships between this history and what she puts into her fiction. I just gave that one little Why I Live at the P.O. story. But when she talks about going up on the fire escape and standing on top of the Lamar Life building, even as the clock tower was being finished, and she's looking out and she is in her own place on her map. If you're familiar with Delta Wedding, when Roy and Laurel go to Marmion, which is like Waverly, and he goes up to the top and he looks out over the world, I mean, that seems to be exactly what Welty was telling us about in that little piece. And there are other little connections like that.
I find it sort of ironic that she was so cutting edge with this, but she didn't want to use an electric typewriter and never considered a word processor or a computer, even though she lived into that age. She didn't carry it forward in her life.
No, but what I hope you see, and you're absolutely right, she was, like me, like afraid of whatever a cloud might be. I like these right here. I forgot what I was going to say now when I made that aside. Maybe I'll come back to that.
Thank you for that
Thank you.
very inspiring presentation. I was just wondering, at that time, 1920s and 30s in Mississippi, did the radio station employ any black people at the time of, because there's a lot of racism and that kind of difficulties in racial problems in Mississippi. Did they have any black people employed?
Not during the time that I was studying, just these 2 years here, or even in the history of the Lamar Life Insurance that I know of. And I doubt that there were, unfortunately, but I was trying to show that Christian Welty was a humanist, and that he, tried to treat people as well as he could during that time. It's interesting to read these extant issues because you realize you are reading history, you're seeing what is happening, and knowing that Welty was writing 90% of it, or making the selections if she was using a canned piece from the station. There is much more about Amos and Andy, for example. And she proudly or appropriately for the time and the radio station and the audience publishes these pictures and say, oh, you've been wanting to see who Amos and Andy are. And she gives them, not in blackface, but in real. So it's a very complicated history, as of course we should understand, especially standing here in the museums where we can learn much more. But I don't think so. I mean, the only reference I found that I've cited a bit is the farm workers who were naturally black coming to hear the Joe Louis fight outside the window. So thank you. And what I was going to answer Beverly's thing, what I think that she learned, not the technology piece of it, which I thought she was learning as she was writing, but that her father's business acumen and the way he treated people. And the way, this idea of taking your top sellers on this marvelous, incredible trip is really just astounding. And so that little book, To the Golden Gate and Back Again, with the underwriter's letters, really does a marvelous job of showing how they appreciated that. And you're right, sir, I was trying to focus at least on how there were some women involved.
We've got time for one more question.
This is a plug for the Lamar Life building. I had the pleasure of working in 2 law offices at different times in the 80s and 90s, and it was a great building to work in. Yeah. The only downside was there was no connected parking.
No.
There is now.
Oh, parking.
Parking. But now there's a walkway to Capitol Towers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so now it's an event space and office buildings kind of thing. In 1999, Lamar Life ceased selling Lamar Life Insurance and was bought out by another insurance company. And you should definitely go out North State Street to see the transmitter building, because now it has been deconstructed from the concrete block building that was put in front of it. And I think it's Scott Allen who is trying to, the last report I saw was renovating it, making it an arts and event space. So go out North State Street, miles, keep going. It's out there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Pearl McHaney another round of applause.
Thank you so much. I'll just leave that there.
Pearl will be available afterwards if you would like to get a couple of copies. We have 2 of her books, one of them, A Tyrannous Eye, Eudora Welty's nonfiction and photography, as well as Eudora Welty Occasions, Selected Writings, as well as Patty Carr Black's work, and several of the Welty books as well. So let's give Pearl another round of applause. Thank you guys for being here with us.